as we seek to work together. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to all. Amen.
Amen. Supervisor Robo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move for the approval of this evening's agenda.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address the board on anything on the agenda this evening? Now is your chance to talk. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address the board on anything on the agenda this evening? That portion of the meeting will be closed. We'll call on the clerk for the
We have a notice of claim from Bolenbeck Fife SC on behalf of Henry L. Griesbach for injuries sustained during EAA at Whitman Regional Airport. This is referred to the Personnel and Finance Committee. Petition for zoning amendment from William H. Schultz, Town of Neenah, excuse me, requesting a zoning change from B1 to R2 for garage. That's referred to the Planning and Zoning Committee. Petition for zoning amendment from Dan Thompson, Town of Wolf River, requesting a zoning change from R1 to B3 for businesses and residential, referred to Planning and Zoning. And a petition for zoning amendment from John Youngworth, Town of Algoma, requesting a zoning change from R1 to R2 for single-family residence. And just a reminder, any nomination papers or paperwork has to be filed by 5 p.m. January 2nd in our office. If anyone is contemplating not running, we need to have your declaration of non-candidacy filed by 5 p.m. this Friday. Otherwise, we have to extend the filing deadline for a week for that for your particular district. So anybody has any questions, just give our office a call. Thank you.
Thank you. Reports from committees, commissions, and boards. Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak for, I'm hoping, the county board. Last night, we had our Christmas party, and I would like to thank the clerk's office on the remarkable job they did to appease all the county board supervisors and their spouses. So, publicly, I'll say thank you.
Supervisor Wernke.
I just want to report on the snow owl situation. We had a meeting at the airport. It was Peter Mall. There was a biologist from the agriculture department, 4 members of the Audubon Society, and we had 2 falconers there. And we had a good meeting, and the biologist from the Department of Agriculture was saying that this happens all over the airport, at Chicago, everywhere, and it's not an odd thing that happened. You know, nobody wanted that bird to be killed, but it came down to the point where they couldn't do anything else. But we did come to a good conclusion on the meeting, and that is that we are going to let the falconers into the airport. The airport is going to purchase a net for them that they set out onto where the birds are, and what it is, it's a remote control type of net, and they put a pigeon in it, and when the bird goes to get the pigeon, they pop it over and they go and get the bird, and then they'll take it a couple 100 miles to the east or west and release it. So I do think that we have the situation solved, and there was a lot of stuff that came up about it, and nobody really wants to do this, but sometimes it has to be done. The reason that these birds are out there to begin with is that of all the flat land that's out there, there's a lot of mice out there and a lot of other kind of animals, and that's why they're out there. So, and these birds are noted for doing that. So I hope everybody's going to be satisfied with this. Thanks.
Thank you. Approval of proceedings from November 6th and 7th budget meetings. And November 21st. And moved and seconded. Supervisor Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just ask for one correction on Monday, November 6th. I was present. It just says I'm excused. If that could just be corrected.
Okay,
Thank
we
you.
will make that correction.
Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. County Executives Report.
There's actually a great deal of items on this agenda that are worthy of comment, but I think I'm only going to comment on two. One is the authorization of a shift premium for Parkview Center nursing staff. Basically, the custom in this area is to pay a night differential to nursing staff, and there's a really acute shortage of CNAs developing, as well as LPNs, and I think it's necessary that we pay this premium so that we can retain staff. Otherwise, we'll end up with a lot of turnover, and with the current shortages in that field, you could end up with a lot of vacancies. And we really have to be staffed 24/7 at the nursing home. We have no choice. So I think it's strategic to address this now, although it's not cheap to give a shift premium. The other item is with regard to the airport terminal. And the item actually on the agenda has to do with how it's funded, whether it's funded from reserves or with bonding. But I do want to let the board know that I would like to slow down this process so that we can really investigate whether this will meet all of our needs and whether there needs to be modifications. What's being proposed is to knock down, and we're not voting on that tonight, but whether we're going to knock down the newest part of the airport and retain the oldest portion of the airport. And just a few of the items that are missing from that is there's no garage. And if you'll remember, we recently bought some pretty sophisticated equipment that measures friction on the runways. There would be no garage to store that, for instance. The rental car company is also very concerned that they'll be excluded from the project. And they've already committed for their rental cars for the next EAA and have kind of hinted that they'll be suing us if, in fact, they're not located at the airport for the next EAA. The building also needs a lot of repairs that aren't part of this project. So I would like to slow down the process and take a good look as to what additional items would have to be done to make that adequate, or if there's a better alternative, such as simply doing the repairs necessary on the current terminal building. I do understand that the board does not support building a new administrative building at this time, and I accept that, but I'm not sure that we've done our homework to find out if this project really meets all of our needs. So regardless of whether it's funded from reserves or from bonding, I think that we still have a process to go through on this. And that's all I have with regard to the agenda.
Okay, Supervisor Wingren has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wonder if, do I have my facts straight here? Could you comment on the truth of this? Did the Hertz contract run out in 2014-15 and no attempt was made to renew it on either part? Yes or no?
I don't know.
You haven't read the documentation that shows that's true?
No, I have not.
Would you like to see that?
Not at this time. But I do know.
Is it true that we're spending almost $150,000 a year on air conditioning and heat for the old terminal?
I believe that is true.
And before that was the main argument to knock it down and build a new one, now you're saying keep it?
One of many arguments.
Well, then.
Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Supervisor Wingren's points there, I wrote down something you said, you're not sure we've done our homework. I haven't seen anybody from, well, Harold Sengstock, with the exception of Supervisor Sengstock, I haven't seen either you or anybody else from the Aviation Committee at any of the facilities and property management meetings, committee meetings where we've discussed this and vetted the options fairly thoroughly. In regards to the garage, if aviation wants a garage somewhere, maybe that's something they should be talking about during their committee meetings, have it on the agenda instead of arguing and bickering about being blindsided. Also, in regards to Hertz, Mr. Rowe indicated during the budget time that there's plenty of room to have a Hertz counter inside the west wing. Again, if that's something that aviation wants, then maybe that's something they should have on their agenda. Maybe you should make sure that it gets on their agenda so they can discuss that during their next committee meeting instead of complaining about being blindsided and how they didn't have an opportunity to have any input on what the board passed during the budget session. Thank you.
Supervisor Shorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harris, as I looked at the resolution for this evening, one of the things that bothered me, and it may be out there somewhere and we just haven't seen it or I haven't seen it, but one of the things I would love to see is that we do a formal business plan, because we have a lot of information floating out, and yet I don't believe there is any business plan to really lay things out for us and providing us with detail that will help us move forward appropriately. So I was actually going to ask that we just slow things down and get a true business plan in place so we have the facts and can make good decisions about how to move forward.
I would concur.
Supervisor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Included in that would be on the marketing side, a prospect list that we're, coded for privacy and all that sort of thing. But, where we have had conversation or we have identified potential business partners for that project. Thank you.
Supervisor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to be redundant, but I think it needs to be said at least one more time, and I wrote down the same quote that evidently Supervisor Haig did. It says, "We haven't done our homework." I don't know who you have in your pocket that's considered we, but I'll tell you that there are a lot of us that did our homework. We did a lot of homework. We did a lot of work. We worked on this from last March until November. Extensive meetings, tours, meetings with the facilities committee, meetings at the airport to accommodate anybody from aviation that would like to come see and hear what was going on, and nobody showed up. So if we didn't do our homework, I would suggest that it's you, the airport director, and most of the airport aviation committee that didn't do your homework. As far as Hertz, during the budget session, I gave two options for Hertz. If you want to maintain Hertz, two places out there where you can put Hertz. I don't know what the big hullabaloo is about Hertz. If the county wants Hertz to be there, then I would suggest, as Mr. Haig did, that somebody get it on the aviation committee agenda. Make sure that we have a, I'm totally flabbergasted that we're sitting here 6 weeks after budget and you don't know if we have a contract with Hertz? Are you serious?
What I'm saying is, I'm being told that the contract hasn't been currently renewed. I do know that Hertz intends to be there and stay there. I'm not sure whether they have a current contract is relevant. I do know that we have a contract with the fixed space operator for more space than what will be available to them in this project. I know that when we knock down the newer part of the terminal, we're also cutting off the fiber optic lines to the airport. I know that the old part of the terminal has perhaps $500,000 worth of maintenance that needs to be done. Remember, we were under the belief that this building was going to be knocked down.
My question was about Hertz, sir.
I don't know for sure if we have a current contract with Hertz. And I'm not sure it's relevant to this discussion.
Right, then I guess we haven't done our homework, have we?
No, but I will remind the board, this was not built into the budget. This was put into the budget as a budget amendment after my opportunity to speak had ended. So I was unable to make any comment or respond at all to this process.
Were you aware that aviation was bringing in a $5.5 million amendment? Be careful how you answer this.
Actually, I was not.
Whoa.
The committees are free to make whatever amendments they choose to. But what I want to make sure is that we're not doing a half measure that will end up having to be replaced with a correct procedure. And normally projects like this have engineering work done. For instance, there's nothing in here about additional insulation for the exposed wall that will exist when the newest part of the terminal is knocked down. I just want to, I'm not saying this is the wrong idea.
What new exposed wall?
Well, if you knock down the newest portion of the terminal, you then make an interior wall into an exterior wall.
The beginning of the tunnel?
Yeah.
That's it?
Well, it's that end wall. There's just lots of issues.
It's not like it's a wall, an exterior wall for 3 offices. It's the exterior wall for a 14-foot wide corridor.
Well, we're not going to resolve whether this project is the ideal project and all the details have been worked out here tonight. And the vote tonight is actually whether it's funded from bonding or from reserves. But I'm giving you the heads up that it's my hope that this gets slowed down and we make sure we're taking the correct steps.
The last I knew from the facilities director was that things are in place, and while he realizes that nothing can be done until January 2nd or 3rd, things were going to start happening first week of January. Are you telling me you've told him not to do that?
I actually do have some prerogatives as county executives, and just because something's budgeted does not mean that it'll immediately proceed.
My question was, have you told the facilities director to not proceed in early January?
No, I have not, but I certainly will do so. I do not think the project has been properly vetted.
And how many meetings were you at?
Well, I've attended several meetings at both the airport committee and at facilities with regard to the proposals on a new administrative building. I did not attend meetings.
I'm beginning to disbelieve a lot of what you're saying, because the correct answer to that question was 0.
Bill, did you or did you not ask Chuck Orenstein how to do this as amendment and then direct him not to tell me that you were doing so?
Absolutely not.
Well, I think we disagree on that point.
So a minute ago you didn't know about these, but now you did.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that you
Never mind, I'm done.
What I'm suggesting is that you didn't want me to know.
Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. County Executive Harris, will this delay, if we go your way, will this do any delay in the real, I think the more important airport project for me is the taxiway runway from the Industrial Development Park to the airport. You know, we were called out on by the city council member when they did the agreement with the Oshkosh Corp saying, what's Winnebago County doing to help us about the aviation industrial park? You know, last spring, as you remember, I wrote a letter or email to the aviation committee members, encourage them to do something. I got chastised for doing that, for encouraging them to do something. I do know the chairman of that committee has tried to do something. I want something done this year, because you told me a while ago, I think more year ago, that you said the airport director wanted this terminal project, which we've been debating now for 4 years now, done before we did the runway project. I'm telling you, as a county board member, that I want to see something done. I know the details have to be filled out. That's why Mr. Warnicki and his committee pulled it down. But I respectfully ask that you and the aviation committee bring something forward, because I'm sick and tired of being called out for I did something when we bought that land. I think that's a little more important than doing this terminal project, in my opinion. But I do agree with some others. We've been debating this terminal project for 4 years. We were told at the time it was, oh, we got to get it done, or the roof will cave in. Well, I'm saying, if this is going to delay that other project I care about, I'm very concerned. I'm going to let you answer.
Well, two things. One, I don't think I chastise you with regard to.
No, you didn't. We all know who did on this board before. I ain't going to name them. And we're all, so I get chastised on the county board floor for encouraging them to do something, and then I get a city council member says, well, why ain't Winnebago County doing something? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm probably saying to everyone, I think we should do something with the aviation industrial park and build that taxiway. If not a short one, if not the full thing. So that's what I'd like to see started in 2018.
Yeah, back when the new administrative building for the airport was proposed, I would have thought that would have been approved and underway before we came back and requested money for the taxiway to the aviation business park. Now, actually hoped that the Bureau of Aeronautics was going to pay for the taxiway, but they've indicated that they might reimburse us, so they're not saying at what percentage, but they want us to have a tenant at the airport first that requires a taxiway. Well, it's a chicken and egg type question. You need the taxiway to bring in the tenant, and you need the tenant then to get reimbursement from Bureau of Aeronautics. So I would have to say, as a top priority at the airport, a new taxiway, at least a nub of one, getting into sufficient amount of property in the aviation business park so that we had lots available to be leased that had a taxiway, it should be a top priority. I see that as a separate item from the issue with regard to whether we repair the existing terminal, knock down part, and make revisions to the remaining portion of the building, or we do something else such as an administrative building. I see that as a separate issue from the taxiway, but I agree with you, the taxiway should be pushed to the front.
Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got really two questions. Do we lease Whitman Airport to EAA when they have it? The reason I'm asking the question is there's an injury sustained doing EAA at Whitman, but yet we could be getting hung for it. And if EAA is supposed to be leasing it, they should have their own insurance, and it should not be put on the county shoulders.
They do have their own insurance. They own a lot of the land they use out there, but portions of the land they use is leased from us, and we make a substantial amount of revenue from that.
You didn't answer my question. Do they have insurance for that since they're leasing it, or are we stuck with it?
Yeah, they're required to have insurance if you do
All right,
business
so
on
then
our property.
this one from Mr. Griesbach really will not affect us. Doing EAA.
I'm not sure, John, maybe you can. I'm not sure of the question.
That accident, Mr. Finch, had happened during EAA. They are required to have insurance. They did, obviously, Mr. Griesbach filed a claim against Winnebago County with regard to this matter, but we've turned that over to our insurance company, but we've also turned it over to EAA. So I think what you're looking for is an answer. Well, can I give you a 100% answer that this won't affect us? No, but EAA does have a duty to defend us and to indemnify us for any negligence on their part. And I think what's happening is Mr. Griesbach's law firm, like any good plaintiff's law firm, is going to sue anybody that could possibly be liable, and that's why we're getting the claim.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
My next question is this. For the new people here, about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, the county owned another building called Tri-County Ice Arena. The boiler was shot, the roof was shot, and we were told by a supervisor or two that we should just sell that building for $1 and get rid of it. So I guess I'm wondering, should we do this? And it did happen, it did work, and people are operating it quite well. So I wonder maybe we should just turn around and sell the building to EAA for $1 and get out from underneath it. Thank you.
Supervisor Warnke.
Supervisor Norton brought up the fact about the taxiway and we're not doing anything. But I want to let you know that at the last aviation meeting, I brought in a item to move and put in a resolution to get this taxiway put in, even if it's on county money, which it would have to be. And the conclusion was that we have to have soil tests done before we can do this, because they have to make sure that the soil's going to be okay as to where they're going to run the taxiway in. So we have not forgotten about this. It's just the fact that we have to get these soil tests done first. So that's all I got to say.
Okay.
I do have just two other quick things before I do appointments. One, this is the last meeting before Christmas, and I want to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I am going to touch on the snowy owl just because it's of such interest to the public. The airport is working with the Audubon Society to come up with non-lethal measures that may be appropriate. But I think the newspaper articles, even though they were told, did not capture a very good balance on what the risks pose with the snowy owls. The owls migrate down here when they're out of food supply in Canada and in the Arctic. So they're often malnourished when they get here. They are not at all familiar with humans, have very little exposure to humans, no concept of moving vehicles like cars and aircraft. And we have, in fact, had an aircraft collision with the snowy owl at our airport in the past, which did tens of thousands of dollars of damage to an aircraft, and which could actually pose a risk to human life. The same week that the snowy owl showed up at our airport, there was an aircraft snowy owl collision at Milwaukee's airport. So while I hope that we come up with a way of handling this, that we don't end up killing animals that we don't have to, measures were taken to try and scare it off. They're not easily scared off. They're not afraid of humans. Apparently not afraid of whistling rounds of ammunition either. But they do pose a significant risk to airports, because if they see a mouse running across the runway, it won't matter if a jet's coming in to land or to take off. They're going to go after the mouse. And we've had past experience with this already. So to give it some perspective, we don't want to kill the animals if we don't have to, but you have to be aware that they do pose a very serious threat. So that's covering that. I do have several appointments tonight.
Okay, we'll go to the county executive's appointments. The Grievance Review Board, Leroy Doms.
Yes. I'm nominating Leroy Doms for reappointment to the Grievance Review Board.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
I'm nominating for reappointment to the Human Service Board, Mike Norton and Harold Singstock. And these.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Reappointing to the Veteran Service Commission, Dale Witzke.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
And reappointments to the Winnefox Library System Board of Trustees, Catherine Freund and Elizabeth Irish.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Supervisor Wojciechowski and Supervisor Youngquist had been asked to be excused from this evening's meeting. Those that couldn't attend our Christmas party last night, they missed a good party. We had 52 people there with supervisors and department heads. And then I would like to compliment Chuck Orenstein for doing such a good job for us. I think it's for like 27 and a half years, so I'd like us to give him a hand. He's going to be retiring in January 4th. Then in Madison, this year in February, 6th and 7th is the legislative exchange meeting. So if anybody's interested in going to that, let me know and we'll put you down and make reservations for you to go. Zoning reports and ordinances. David Beverly Yeatis, Town of Nakaimai, tax parcel number 012-0573, Supervisor Keller. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. A mandatory ordinance number 120117, rezoning from A1 agribusiness to A2 general agriculture. Supervisor Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move mandatory ordinance 120117.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Report number 2, Kevin J. Ann M. Condon and Ronald B. Shirley E. Miller, Revocable Trust, Douglas R. and Linda M. Miller, Town of Nakaimai, tax parcel number 012-0524, 012-0526, parcel 012-0527, /527 parent E or parent 2, 012-0529 and 012-530. Supervisor Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move acceptance report 02.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. A mandatory ordinance number 120217, rezoning from R1A to 2A1 rural residential general agriculture agribusiness to A1, A2 agribusiness general agriculture. Supervisor Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move mandatory ordinance 120217.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolutions and ordinances. Resolution number 221-12-2017, commendation for Lyle Clayton. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for resolution 221-12-2017. Following active duty service in the United States Air Force, Lyle Clayton joined the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office as a deputy sheriff in January 1997. He spent the next 20 years in the Corrections Division. During his career, Lyle was promoted to the rank of corporal and served as a shift supervisor. In May 2000, he became a certified law enforcement officer, which afforded him the opportunity to diversify his duty assignments and work in the court services unit when needed. Lyle had a reputation of being a fair and compassionate officer who treated everyone with respect and dignity. Amongst his peers, he was known as a hard worker who served as a resource and mentor for his new staff. Please join me in expressing our gratitude and best wishes to Lyle as he shifts his focus to spending time as an avid outdoorsman.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 222-12-2017, authorize the transfer of $22,000 from the other operating expense category to the health insurance line item of the UW Extension Office 2017 budget to cover a projected overage. Supervisor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for the approval of resolution number 222-12-2017.
Then moved and seconded. Supervisor Gabbard.
I just have a question here. So it's $22,000 for 2 employees, so that's $11,000 each employee, $916 a month for each employee. So my question is, what is the cost of insurance for an individual versus a family? Can somebody answer that?
don't have the exact amounts with me. I can certainly get those to you, but it's more than enough difference to account for that difference in the budget. I did do that calculation, and it's approximately $15,000 a year difference between an employee single coverage and full family coverage.
So is this for the whole year then, the 22,000?
Yes, I think the full difference would have been more than that, but there were some overages or some extra money available in the labor accounts generally.
Okay, thank you.
Pardon? I was just trying to see if I could make it. We'll vote by machine, seeing there's money involved. Vote aye if you approve, no if you disapprove. That is passed. Resolution 223-12-2017, change funding source for airport terminal building, partial demolition and repairing of roof on the remaining portion of the general fund to undesignated fund balance. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Resolution number 223-12-2017.
Been moved and seconded. Supervisor Warnke.
I would like to propose an amendment to put this on hold indefinitely because there are so many questions about this, and I would like to talk on the subject if it is, if I have a second.
Second.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the reason that I'm doing this is I have a list of stuff that has not been addressed. And I'll start, renovate the insulate the east wall of the west wing.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
This is about funding. You have to keep it to the roof, the partial demolition, repairing of the roof and remaining portion of the general fund, undesignated fund balance.
I have to what? I'm telling you why I would like this tabled, and the reason for it is we don't have an absolute cost on this thing. They were shooting at the hip when they came in with 1.1 million, and I have a list of stuff here that was not even addressed. So how can you approve 1.1 million and then they're going to be short, and then all of a sudden they're going to come in like they did with the courthouse where they didn't get the numbers right either.
Point of order again, Mr. Chairman. This resolution is in with respect to the funding. Has nothing to do with the project. It's already been decided what's going to happen with the project. This is talking about the funding.
I'd like to hear from the legal counsel on that one.
If you move to postpone indefinitely, then this can be debated or talked about, but what you talk about has to be with regard to the main resolution.
Well, it is in regard to the main resolution, John.
Well, hold on. I'm not the person that decides that. That's going to be up to the chair to decide that. All right? So I'm just telling you what Robert's Rules of Order are. This isn't a rule with regard. This isn't a legal rule with regard to the open meetings law. What Robert's Rules of Order says, if you move to postpone indefinitely, which is what I believe you're doing, then any debate on this has to be with regard to the underlying resolution itself.
Okay, so they came in with a 1.1 million, and what happens if they are short on that 1.1 million? You're gonna leave a half a building out there, or what?
I'm not the person to answer that.
Well, the point is, when I asked some questions when we were bringing this in, I was told, I don't care, I don't care. Well, let me tell you something, I do care. We've worked on this thing for 4 years, and then all of a sudden somebody works on it for 2 months and they come in with this harebrained idea.
So Bobby, do you want to postpone it?
What do you mean, do I want to postpone it?
Well, you're gonna have to do like Mr. Bodnar says, it's gonna have to be, you're gonna have to postpone it like you mentioned. Are you gonna postpone it indefinitely, or? I can't allow debate, I don't wanna allow debate on it because it's not.
Okay, I would like to postpone it indefinitely.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to postpone it indefinitely. Supervisor Faria, postponing it?
No, sir, mine was on a clarification on the resolution itself.
Supervisor Brooks on postponing it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Bodnar and yourself have hit it right on the head. This has nothing to do with the project. I agree with Supervisor Warnke, and I agree with the county exec that if they want to continue looking on to see if there's something else that needs to be included or something else that needs to, a different avenue to go down, they should do that. This is simply about how do we fund these types of projects. I'd like to point out one thing. During the budget session, Mike Elder, the Facilities and Property Director, was asked specifically by me, and Vice Chair Rowe was asked by me, if that other $200,000, if those numbers had come from his recommendation as to what it would take to complete the project as passed back at the budget session. I, at that time, had voiced a concern that we were using undesignated funds for it rather than bonding for it. I'm not aware of any capital project that has ever used anything other than bonding, and I don't know why we want to change now. When I sat at the bond rating meeting, and I said this before and I'll say it again, one of the things that makes us very attractive is our reserves, and we're using our reserves up at a rate that's going to create a problem for us. We need to be cognizant of that fact. We need to recognize what makes us attractive. I asked Chuck what he felt about this, and I asked it at the budget session, and I asked him a couple times since then. I'd like to point out that Chuck has received many awards over the years. Chuck has done a tremendous job, and I will tell you, as a past department head, I relied on Chuck's opinions on things, and I don't understand why this board at that time didn't rely on our finance director's opinion that we should be using bonding for this project, not that we should be using undesignated funds. I am against postponing it only for that fact. I think if we're going to do this project, if we end up doing this project, we need to know where the money's going to come from instead of bringing it back here again and delaying everything. All this resolution says is, if the project goes ahead, it has to be bonded dollars, not undesignated funds. The rest of the arguments that are being presented tonight have nothing to do with this resolution and what this resolution is trying to do.
Thank you. Supervisor Eisen on postponing?
Well, but yes, I would like to have this referred to the Aviation Committee. That's a higher level motion, and it takes precedent over postponing indefinitely.
Well, that died for a lack of a second at the moment. Well, there wasn't even a second for it, so.
There wasn't a second.
Supervisor Norton.
Thank you. I agree with almost what Supervisor Brooks says. And my only question is, okay, if we do not, shouldn't we defeat this motion to delay it and pass this motion? Because then won't the Aviation Committee or someone have to bring forth, because all bonded projects have to have 2 presentations before the board? Wouldn't that be much better? And wouldn't that be what the county executive is asking for and what others are asking for, is that we must look at this project further? So I'm against postponing this, and I'm for voting for it because, and there's another question I have, okay, then this whole thing's in limbo if we postpone it, because Chuck told at the Finance Committee that if we don't pass this resolution, that it will be going on a general reserve by whatever. But if we postpone it, then it puts this whole thing in limbo. So I guess, to be short and simple, I think we should defeat the motion to postpone, and I think should we pass this, make it a capital project, and then you get your wish or what your thoughts are, and you can have them presented, and then we can go over the details.
Supervisor Keller on postponing it?
Yes. I'm not in favor of postponing it, but Mike, I do have a question. If we do postpone this, then we're not accepting this resolution. And if we do not accept this resolution, then the funding source remains general fund undesignated fund balance, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
It doesn't change. It still gets funded, but it just doesn't get funded from bonding. Thank you.
Can you answer his question?
Which one was that?
The one from Mr. Keller. He says if he postpones it.
It doesn't change what is in existence, and what is in existence is funding from the general fund.
That's correct.
So if we pass this tonight, then it gets bonded. If we postponed it, it comes from the general fund.
Well, the status quo is that it's presently to come from the undesignated fund balance.
Right. So I'm thinking if we postpone this, then it still comes from the undesignated fund balance.
Right. I mean, at the present time, yes.
That's
because
correct.
you don't have a resolution passed to bond for it.
Right.
Which takes a supermajority.
So I think it's just better to not postpone it and get it from the fund, or from bonding, as is the proper way to do it. Thank you.
And just so you understand, if you vote on this and there is not a supermajority to support to bond for this, then that's dead. That option is dead.
On postponing it, you mean?
No, if you go ahead and vote on it tonight and you don't have, what do we need, 27? If you don't have 27 votes to carry it, then that option is dead.
That option is dead, which means
at least until April, when you have a new county board that comes in.
So if that option is dead, in other words, getting it from bonding, then what is in existence doesn't change.
That's correct.
And that means it's still going to come from the undesignated fund balance.
That's correct. I agree with that.
So if we postpone it, it stays the same as it is now before we do anything.
That's true.
Thank you.
Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If memory serves, we had this discussion during the budget hearing when Mr. Ornstein suggested that we change the funding source at that point in time. I think we went ahead and passed the Mr. Rowe's amendment simply because the same argument that's come up tonight, which Chuck presented then, which was we don't fund capital projects with undesignated fund balance money. And the counter to that was how many capital projects that are bonded for end up getting paid off with undesignated fund balance money. So there are several projects that we take up as a county, millions and millions of dollars, at least since I've been on this board, that we've initiated the concept of bonding for that particular project. And at the end of the day, we end up paying off any number of those bond issues when our fund balance gets to be greater than it should be, or at a fairly high level. So I think that that's the argument is this resolution, accurate in its assessment of the situation? Yes and no. There are monies coming out of the undesignated fund balance to help support next year's budget, but certainly, as we just saw tonight in passing one resolution for increasing health insurance, there will be monies returned from many departments into the undesignated fund balance. And that is not part of this resolution. So what we are seeing is the part of the bucket here where the tap is on draining down the level, but we are not seeing the part here where the tap is on filling the bucket. And that's what happens. So in regards to the argument of we don't fund capital projects with undesignated fund balance money, that statement is just not accurate, and I would support postponing this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Warnke?
I got another question for legal. Originally, I had someone who wanted to bring this resolution in as a motion to reconsider, and I was told by someone that I couldn't do that because it... What?
He has a question. Go ahead and answer it for him.
My understanding is that this was something that was decided during the county budget process to
That's correct, yep.
to fund it in this manner, and your opportunity to reconsider this expired after the last county board meeting. You needed to bring it in before the next full meeting of the county board, which was in November. You could still bring it in, but you would need a unanimous vote of the county board to reconsider that. And that's obviously not going to happen. I mean, I could be wrong, but just from your debate here tonight, it's obviously not going to happen that you're going to have a unanimous decision of the county board to allow you to reconsider it at this time. So once you're past the next full meeting of the county board, your opportunity to reconsider vanishes unless you can get everybody on the board to agree.
Well, you know that's not going to happen.
Supervisor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I would be opposed to postponing indefinitely. Again, we've talked about this for 4 years, and now we're going to postpone it indefinitely. I don't know if the supervisor realizes that it's not going to pass. But if it would, it kills it. And that's not what you want to do with the financing. We want to determine tonight what the financing is going to be. I can't imagine there are over 2 supervisors that would vote in favor of this resolution. And while I have the microphone, I have to make a statement. You said tonight that I had said at budget, I don't care. I did. And you told the Northwestern that. If you had done your homework, and if the Northwestern had done your homework, you would have realized that when I said I don't care, it was I don't care if you put Hertz here or if you put Hertz there. That's what I don't care about. It wasn't I don't care. So please get your facts straight to this board and to the Northwestern before you talk to them again.
Supervisor Gordon.
I did want to point out, I did vote against this resolution during budget because it was not bonded. However, my question for Mr. Bodner, if we don't vote on this and instead vote to postpone, we can still bond in the future.
You
Can
could
we
bond,
not?
yes, you could bond in the future for it.
So if we vote against this, it doesn't mean that the project is going forward and it will be from the general fund. It just means
If you go forward, you could pay for it under the designated fund balance, and Chuck, can you bond, I think you can bond subsequently, correct?
Can you bond up?
Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you.
So let's say you did, you did a quarter of the project and you decided you wanted to bond for it, you could come back in before it was finished and do that.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Farley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe my comment becomes more relevant with your approval. Let me address the numbers on line 17. It says the county board approved the use of $5,313,760 of general fund undesignated fund balance to balance the 2018 budget. I believe, wasn't that number 3 million? It was, wasn't it? Yes. So the 5 million is incorrect. And if that is incorrect, then the actual current balance should be somewhere around 17 million, not 14 million. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So folks, we got to vote on the right figures here. And what's on this resolution is incorrect. So the correct figures is the current balance should be right around 17 million, rough figures. That kind of puts it in perspective as to whether you want to take another million out of the 17 million or you want to bond for it. So that gives you a little better perspective on the numbers that are before you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Supervisor Brooks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of thoughts on this to clarify. If this gets postponed, that doesn't mean the project stops. It doesn't mean the project starts. It just means this is how we're going to fund for the money. And I understand it, and I'm not going to say I don't care. I really don't understand why 17 million versus 15 million should be the issue. The issue is, what is the best way to do this to prevent running the undesignated fund down any further than we absolutely have to? Secondly, as it relates to using undesignated funds to pay off bonds in the future, or having done that in the past, my question is, why are we eliminating an option to do that? I think that if Chuck and the county exec down the line see that we're going to have a significant increase, they have that option to pay that off. Let's not kill that option. Let's give them those tools in order to do what is going to be best for that undesignated fund. Once again, I encourage the county exec to look further to make sure that the actual costs, or that this is the direction they're going to go, but that the actual costs are what were given to us at the budget session. But once again, I just don't understand the reluctance to moving this to a bonding issue. It seems to be a pretty cut and dry way to deal with this, and I don't know of any other projects, to clarify Supervisor Haig's comment. I don't know of any other projects that have come to this board that were capital, that came in as undesignated fund balances. That's why you do the capital projects. That's why you do all that funding.
Supervisor Ramos?
A point of order.
Go ahead.
The motion on the floor is to postpone indefinitely. We're talking about the resolution. That's not what's on the floor. We're talking about whether or not to postpone it indefinitely.
Actually, like I said earlier, Mr. Rowe, the Robert's Rules of Order say that if you move to postpone indefinitely, debate can only be with regard to the underlying resolution. So it is correct for Mr. Brooks or anybody else to talk about the underlying resolution. That is in fact the only thing you can talk about under a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Supervisor Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would strongly urge you not to vote to postpone this. We've heard discussions tonight about how much funding. We've heard discussions about the project itself and its merits. But the resolution, as many of you have pointed out, clearly states that it is simply about
$35 fine.
that it is simply about a funding source. I do feel typically with this sort of project, we do typically bond for it. And we've heard discussions about questioning the numbers 15 versus 17, 4 versus 5 million. And while the numbers are important, the bigger concern for me is the trend. The trend that we see in the utilization of the general fund undesignated fund balance. And the trend of it going down. That's really where the concern is for me. I simply do not see the drawback to bonding this versus using fund balance. That has been the case in most projects like this. It preserves some of that fund balance that I do fear will actually be needed next year. $4 to $5 million of fund balance utilized this year. Just imagine if we had to use 4 to 5 million more next year. Whether you're talking 15 million or 17 million, that's going to bring us below that $14.7 million limit that we simply don't want to go below. So I see no drawback to preserve our ability to bond this. So I'd urge you not to vote to postpone it so we can allow to convert this to bonding. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Wingren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, the wisdom of Mr. Brooks is well taken. Postponing this does nothing other than send a very important message, and that is that we bond for these projects, as we have done with every major capital project in recent years, as far as I know, forever. One concern I have, I don't know if you can answer it now, but later, why are these figures wrong? That's just bothersome, that you would put a resolution like this with incorrect figures. I want to call the question.
Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, for one, will not be satisfied with advancing the terminal project until a public hearing is held with the airport stakeholders, EAA, Fox Valley Tech, airport tenants, and the City of Oshkosh Industrial Park representatives. In that respect, I would like to bump up that postponement to a time certain, January 9th, when we can have a public hearing from the stakeholders and then proceed when all the stakeholders from the public, from the airport are here to give us the direction to go forward with this project. But I need a second in order to have it postponed until January 9th to have a public hearing with the stakeholders.
There was a second there.
Well, Mr. Eisen's motion would, I'm sorry. Mr. Eisen's motion would take precedence right now. If that's defeated, then you go with you go to the second motion, which is to postpone indefinitely. However, if you postpone indefinitely, it does not stop anybody from asking the clerk's office to put a motion on to take this off the table at any time in the future. So if Mr. Warnke's motion is successful, any one of you could come in at the next meeting, or before the next meeting, or whenever, and ask that motion to remove that from the table for consideration be brought before the board.
Supervisor Shirk on the postponement?
No.
Supervisor Finch on the postponement?
Heck, I can't answer it, truthfully. The only reason I said that is the gentleman that brought this up, he's talking about stakeholders, all right? And I could be wrong, but I think I'm a stakeholder because I'm a Winnebago County taxpayer. And I believe there's enough stakeholders right
They
here
said there was a second.
to do it. So I can't accept Supervisor Eisen's deal about the stakeholders, because everyone in this room is a stakeholder. I rest my case.
Okay, we'll vote by our little iPad. We'll vote aye if you want to postpone it till January 9th. Vote no if you don't.
I'm sorry, are we voting on Paul Eisen's?
Yes. Yes. Share some of the drinks with us. Vote aye if you want to postpone, no if you don't.
Go ahead, Ken. Now you can vote.
That is lost. Now we'll go right back onto the Warnke's motion.
Oh, 1 second. I gotta add a vote.
Supervisor Wingren.
I call the question.
Wherever. Supervisor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because there's been a lot of discussion, I want to remind you, all of those opposed to postponing it indefinitely, please vote no. Thank you.
You ready?
Yep. That has failed. So no.
Ready to vote on that?
Pardon?
You wanna vote on it right away?
Sure, there's no lights.
Okay.
It's on the main motion, resolution?
Yes. That is passed. Resolution number 224-12-2017. Amend the table of organization for the Winnebago County Human Services Department Behavioral Health Services Division. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of Resolution 224-12-2017.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 225-12-2017. Amend the table of organization for the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of Resolution number 225-12-2017.
Been moved and seconded. Supervisor Gabbard.
I have a question. Maybe Sheriff Motz can answer this. So we're taking 5 part-time correction officers to full-time, and it says it will not require an increase in labor budgets since there are already sufficient funds. So you're taking 5 part-time people and making them full-time. Is that in your budget for next year?
Yes, it has been in our budget for many years because they work full-time hours. It was the amount of vacations and vacancies that exist. So there's no additional monies needed. We have been budgeting full-time hours, but they've been classified as part-time.
So they are working full-time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Haig.
That was my question too. It's the same question I had on the resolution 224 as well. Is this in the 2018 budget for the Human Services Department as well?
Yes, I guess, right?
They got me stymied. Supervisor Barker, would you go ahead?
I could talk a long time, I guess. I just want to know, is the benefits also included in that, Sheriff?
Correct.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolution 226-1227, authorized payment of shift premiums for Parkview Health Center nursing staff. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of resolution number 226-12-2017.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 227-12-2017, adopt revisions of Winnebago County compensation schedule. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of resolution number 227-12-2017.
Then moved and seconded. Supervisor Shorsey.
Mine is a yes, but. And my but is what I would like to see come before the board is, and again, maybe it's one of those things you're already doing, but to have a review and then a report to us in terms of looking at total compensation for county positions. So instead of just looking at salary and benefits separately, to bring those together to look at what we are compensating in the total package. And then a comparison with similar counties and also the regional marketplace for similarly valued positions. And again, because of our financial situation, it's something that I think it's time that, you know, if you're not doing it already, we probably want to go there. And then also a key metric, measuring and looking at inflation rate versus what we're doing with positions. So just to take a closer look at it so we're sure that we're in line if we need to be, and consider the total compensation packages. Thank you.
We did do that just recently, and she's making some updates to them provisions of the study. Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to Resolution 227, I see the fiscal note that there's no impact. Where's this 1% coming from? Is it already in the pot for 2018, or in the merit pay pot, Chuck, or why is there no fiscal impact?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to address that?
Yes.
It's yes to both parts of your question. The 1% increase in the schedule was an assumption used in building the 2018 labor budgets. So any impact of that was included in the budget that's passed. However, the 1% increase is not an across-the-board pay increase, and it doesn't result in an immediate pay increase for anyone who is above the minimum of the pay range. So it's not an across-the-board. It does raise those target minimums of each grade in our salary schedule. So the real impact is in the catch-up raises for people who are below the target minimums. We have artificial minimums to kind of phase in the minimums that were recommended by the compensation consultant last year. And those amounts, the catch-up raises, based on the 1% increase assumption, were all built into the 2018 budget.
Okay, so when we went through each department and they had budget for 10 employees, 50 employees, that was all built into the wages or salaries of that department?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 228-12-2017, amend Winnebago County Employee Compensation Plan. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of resolution number 228-12-2017.
Been moved and seconded. Supervisor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might ask for a little further explanation of what's going on here, in particular with this resolution. We just talked about a 1% for those on the low end to catch up a little bit. Can you perhaps explain this in a little more detail?
Certainly be glad to do that. This resolution doesn't change any of the numbers or any of the pay rates or the pay for any individual employees at all. It really just changes the language of the pay plan that was included in a prior resolution that was adopted by the board in July of 2016 when we adopted the pay plan per se. One thing we didn't address when we adopted the new pay plan was how we go about making changes. And we talked about, do we want, are we going to hire a consultant at some future time to see if we're keeping pace with the labor markets and so forth. And obviously, my department, tries to keep tabs on that as well as we can, where we are in the labor market and how particular issues or particular positions, are being impacted by changes. And we do have a procedure that was set out in the compensation plan past a year and a half ago for new positions. To assign a pay grade to a new position, we go through the same steps. I got training from our consultant and use her system essentially to assign a grade to new positions. What we don't have, and it's just recently become apparent and needed, is a way to change the grade of a position that we already have, but where maybe things have changed, not just the overall labor market, but maybe the responsibilities of the position have changed, or maybe those skills have become more scarce. So even though it's kind of the same skills we're looking for, they're rarer and even need to be at a higher grade compared to other positions. So you need to be able to evaluate some of those changes from time to time. And we just never set out a procedure to do that. So I'm left not really sure, do I have authority to do that? Does the committee have authority to do that? Or since the pay plan with all the positions assigned to grades was passed by the board, maybe that has to come back to the board. And I thought that would be too cumbersome a procedure since there is, some fairly, a lot of subtle factors really go into compensation decisions. And so I thought that the best procedure to follow was essentially the one we used for the appeals. As you recall, last year, after the board passed the plan, there was an allowed appeal procedure where particular employees could say, I still don't agree with where my position was placed, I'm going to file an appeal, got a recommendation from the consultant, look at different factors, and brought that back to the Personnel and Finance Committee for a final decision on those appeals. And I thought that procedure worked quite well. And essentially, I'm adopting a similar type of procedure for that to be put into place once a year, so that if department heads, for instance, feel a position in their department is in too high a grade or too low a grade, they can file a request to have that reconsidered or looked at again. I'll look at it. I'll probably send it to the consultant, have the consultant look at it. I don't want to, tie us to any particular consultant, but as of right now, I would certainly use the same one, or would plan to do that, and then bring that to the committee with recommendations and have the committee make a final decision.
Your answer kind of dovetailed into my next question, because the attachment that goes with the resolution refers to McGrath Consulting Group. Now, we're all obvious that they're the ones that recommended the change in this new salary plan to the board. I would assume that the decision, if the board sets a policy here and agrees to this, that you would be able to do that with consulting with the county exec and the committee of jurisdiction. How long are we going to have these consulting firms on the county payroll here just to make these appeal decisions, or this, I think, logical course of change decision. I mean, shouldn't we be able to do that internally here? Don't we have the people to do that?
We have people, mainly me, who could do it, but sometimes there's an advantage in bringing in a consultant to take another look at it. Typically, on that kind of thing, it could be done for a very modest cost, but in any event, this proposal doesn't lock us into any one way of doing it. We could either decide to use the consultant if we had money available and thought it was justified, but if it gets too expensive, it leaves open the option of just doing it in-house.
Should I be able to do it internally? That's an option?
It's an option.
Okay, good, very good, thank you.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 229-12-2017, approved 3-year contract renewal for operation of Three Waves Clinic and Wellness Center. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of resolution number 229-12-2017.
Then moved and seconded. Supervisor Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the addition of the Three Waves Clinic, what have we seen in regards to a decrease in spending per employee for different health-related issues? Are we seeing, in general, a healthier employee-based situation? And as such, are premiums going down?
We don't have the data to really give you a definitive answer in terms of the overall employee population and what our healthcare costs are. Right now, we're in an environment where our healthcare costs are going up, but we don't really know going up from what, because we only have data for the current year. Prior years, we were fully insured, and so the insurance companies may have the data, but they're not sharing it in a detailed fashion with us. They're just telling us they lost a pile of money on us, which is probably true, but I can't really quantify it very well. We have more detailed data this year since we went self-funded, essentially running our own insurance company, hiring someone to manage claims. But really, the best we can hope for in the health marketplace is not necessarily a decrease unless we make real substantial changes to the plan design. We're trying to put on the brakes and slow down the rate of increase. We can, however, demonstrate that the clinic is saving us at least roughly $250,000 after paying for all the costs of the clinic per year. And I'm confident it's actually saving us quite a bit more than that, but I can't accurately determine how much more, because it really depends on how much the rate would have been without the clinic, and we don't have enough data to really give you a confident answer about that.
How do you quantify this $250,000 savings?
Sure. That we can say with great confidence, because what we do is we take the number of visits to the clinic, and they're given billing codes just like they would be at a doctor's office. So there's a standard office visit and a more in-depth office visit and a physical exam, and different kinds of treatment options are all given billing codes. So we add up all the visits and the billing codes that our employees and their dependents have had in their clinic visits throughout the year. Then we look at the data we do have about how much it costs us when employees go to other providers, if they go to Affinity or ThedaCare or Aurora or whoever they may go to for the same billing codes. So we can look at data and say, if I go to Aurora and see a doctor for a standard office visit, it might cost the county $140. We add up all those costs that we saved by people coming to the clinic, and the difference between that number and the cost of running the clinic are about $250,000 a year currently.
So the savings is applied through a discount through having our own clinic, not necessarily through less visits to particular clinics. I guess with that said and that clarified, earlier we had a conversation about moving money for individual versus a family health care plan, which seems extraordinarily high to me. With regards to the Three Waves Clinic then, are we doing enough? Is there something more that we should be or could be doing to ensure or help ensure a healthier employee base that would help drive down those costs. I just went through the same process with my employer, and that's at least twice as much as what I'm paying in premiums for a family plan for a much smaller group plan.
Well, we are doing some other things, and we're always looking for new measures to take to try to control those health costs, because it's a very big item in terms of dollar amount. One thing we're putting into effect that we've been working on for a long time is a targeted disease management program. We have had the health risk assessment program that I'm confident has saved us quite a bit of money over the past 5 or 6 years since we started that. And we've refined it a little bit since then. But now the next step, I think, would be to put into place a disease management program that really targets people with certain chronic disease states, primarily diabetes, hypertension, and high cholesterol. And those kind of chronic conditions add up to a lot of money in the health plan overall. We've taken a look at that. And studies have shown that you can control those costs a little bit by giving people an incentive to come in and make sure they're actually following the treatment plan and actually taking the medicines they should be taking, and actually are going through the education programs they should have about, you know, their own health, as opposed to just kind of falling off the wagon, because a lot of those things don't show up in a lot of symptoms. So we're putting that into place just next month. We've been working on that a long time, trying to get that set up through the Three Waves Clinic. They've just hired a new health coach after some turnover issues there to help manage that program for us, as well as do different things for the city and the school district. So that's one thing, and it's not going to pay off immediately. It's going to be a long-term savings, a long-term impact, but the hope is that we can then keep a few people from going from being kind of borderline, you know, high cholesterol, to being, you know, in the hospital for a stroke or a heart attack, where it costs a lot more money and is obviously a lot more bad news for the employee. You know, it's not just a financial decision. So we're always looking for things like that to do. Otherwise, we'll have to consider various options, because we are looking at, you know, underfunding our health plan currently. We really haven't brought it up to kind of the market rate for the plan we offer. At least that's what the numbers are telling us. So we're looking at a difficult decision next year on the health plan as well, I would forecast. And we'll have to look at options. We'll have to look at, you know, potentially changing some design features of the plan. We'll have to look at, and I'm not saying we're going to do this, we'll certainly consider options like high deductible plans, health reimbursement or health savings accounts again, which we had in the past, but probably not the best way it could have been done. And otherwise, one way to save money is to restrict the network. You know, we could get a better deal, you know, next year if we decided that our employees had to go to Aurora, for instance, or had to go to Affinity or Ascension, whatever they're called now. But then you have a restrictive group, and the employees pay a lot of money if they want to go see a different doctor, and that leads to a lot of employee dissatisfaction. I hope we don't have to take that course because of the effect on employees, but that's the kind of thing you have to do to really get the numbers down.
Thank you for a well-articulated answer.
Thank you.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Authorize resolution number 230/12/2017. Authorize Winnebago County submitting an engagement letter encouraging prosecution of those persons and entities who have significant role in the creation of the opioid epidemic. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of resolution number 230/12/2017.
Been moved and seconded. Supervisor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm totally opposed to this resolution. Primarily, it's a enterprise for lawyers to make a lot of money, and we got to follow it through. Okay, they're suing the drug companies. The drug companies make the drugs. The doctors prescribe the drugs. Pharmacies supply it, and then the patient uses it. So the biggest problem is those that are using the drugs, that get hooked on it and go outside of it to get buy illegal drugs for pain or whatever they're using it for. that's where the problem is. The problem's not with whoever manufactures the drugs, but who's ever dispensing them, whether it be the doctor by prescription, and they could be held liable for that for malpractice, or if it's the pharmacist that's distributing it and not being careful to make sure that he's distributing it properly. So suing the drug companies, like I said, it's like chasing the white rabbit, where the lawyers will make a lot of money off of it. I don't see any advantage to us. If you look at the the contract with the lawyers, half of the money recovered, if any, would go to the lawyers. And that there's no guarantee of recovery. The county understands, and part of it, I'll read it, no guarantee of recovery. County understands and acknowledges that a dispute resolution through litigation often takes years to achieve. County understands and acknowledges that there's no guarantee of assurance of any kind of regarding the likelihood of success of the lawsuit. But the council and national law firm will use their skill, diligence, and expertise to diligently pursue the lawsuit. In other words, billable hours. And that's pretty much what it amounts to. So I'm against this. I will vote against it.
Supervisor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me elaborate a little more on Supervisor Smith's comments. Of the many resolutions I've seen in my 16 years on this county board, this is perhaps the worst. Can anybody imagine they want to sue the companies that produce pain medication prescribed by licensed, highly skilled doctors? This is just irresponsible. I would urge all of you not to support this. If this were to, by chance, very remotely, bring this county some money, and the other 50 counties that have already signed on to it, I'm told, just think about that, what would happen to the price of these drugs that millions of people take. We all complain now our drug costs are too high. Do you think the drug companies are going to eat this? No way. Even the litigation costs are going to rise the cost of the drugs themselves. This is just absurd, and I would urge all of you not to support this.
Here's what would happen to the money. It would be the same as the tobacco. We would get the money and then the state will take it. Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask the Corporation Counsel to give his recommendation on this contract. It's a contract between us and the law firms. Do you recommend that the board proceed with that contract? Is that a fair contract for what we would want to achieve?
I think the contract in and of itself is fair, because this is going to be a very complex litigation matter, and this is no different than the contract is on most contingent fee litigation cases. I don't think that it's up to you whether you want to do this or not. I don't think the way that Mr. Smith and Mr. Farr explained it to the board is quite correct. You have, there's a lot of evidence out there, and he asked me a question, sir. Yeah, it is relevant to the resolution. You have, if anybody saw 60 Minutes on Sunday night, and if you didn't see it, you can go on their website and read what was presented. Really, what the resolution is about is not the fact that you have companies that are prescribing or doctors prescribing opioid medications to people. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's not what this lawsuit tries to prohibit. What you have is you have about 4 or 5 companies that would be the defendants in this type of litigation. McKesson is one, Pharma Purdue, which I think is owned by Johnson & Johnson, is another, that prescribed sold ridiculous amounts of opioids to pharmacies and did not present the companies with sufficient records as to what was happening with those. You had them selling enough opioids to some pharmacies in rural areas that would have supplied like a 60 times of the daily dose of everybody who lived in that area, in that community, with opioids. And obviously these opioids weren't going to the people that lived in the community. They were being sold to parties that were selling these illegally. That's what the suit is about. It's not about preventing people who have back injuries or who have knee injuries or something like that from getting hydrocodone. There's a lot of facts and pretty clear pattern that that the drug companies weren't keeping adequate records with regard to who they were selling these medications to, that they knew or should have known that these medications were later being sold illegally, and it cost Winnebago County and a lot of other jurisdictions tons of money, whether it's Human Services, the Sheriff's Department, the coroner, my office, other people, cost them a lot of money with regard to this, trying to get some of that money back, just like with regard to the tobacco litigation. That was in relationship to the fact that the states, through Medicare and other medical assistance, had expended a lot of money to treat people over the years that were addicted to tobacco. So that's the case. Whether you want to enter into this agreement to do this or not is up to you, but I don't think it's not as portrayed by some of you that this is to stop people from getting opioid medication who need it. So that's what it's about, and it's up to you whether you want to buy into this or not.
I think they have like about 25 or 30 counties already that are.
43.
43?
43 of the 72 counties.
Supervisor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm hoping that my concern is not absurd, but I looked at the second whereas on the second page, and it's, at least it suggests to me, and I'm not an attorney who knows how to read that kind of stuff, it suggests to me that there would be a possibility that if the suit is successful, it would bring in less for a particular county, namely Winnebago County, than Winnebago County's share of the lawyer's fee. Because some counties will benefit, or if the suit is successful, some counties would benefit more than others, and some might be stuck with a bigger fee than the settlement, than their share of the settlement. I don't know if I've misread this or not, but I'm concerned about it. Actually, I've heard more arguments to suggest that it's a dumb idea to start with, but thank you.
Supervisor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to urge my fellow supervisors to vote in favor of this. Not only are there 43 counties already in Wisconsin who are on this, but this is a nationwide lawsuit against these specifically 4 or 5 pharmaceutical companies. And the problem was not that people, or the problem is not that people are not going to have pain medication, but the problem where they should be held accountable is that they told doctors this stuff is not, that they were selling, was not going to be addictive. They told doctors this, they told the pharmacies this, and doctors, based on what they were being told by pharmaceutical representatives and the pharmacy themselves, prescribed far more than perhaps they should have, but based on what they knew or what they thought they were being told, it was going to be a safe product to be used. And I would add that on page 4 of the engagement letter, the first line under A, there is no fee for the services provided herein unless a monetary recovery acceptable to county is obtained by counsel and the national law firm in favor of the county. So it's, I think that we have between Human Services, the Sheriff's Department, the coroner, various other agencies have had to spend a lot of money based on this opioid epidemic, which should never have happened, and the pharmaceutical companies do need to be held responsible. We can't do this on our own. We will need attorneys, and if we're successful, of course, the attorneys will have earned what they are proposing to get from this. I would urge my fellow supervisors, please vote in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't agree more with Supervisor Smith and Supervisor Farr. In fact, it almost seemed like Mr. Bodner was portraying a commercial for this piece here. 60 Minutes used to be a very reputable news program. I'm not exactly sure that it is any longer. And he's telling us that some drug company is making pharmacies buy more opioids than they need. Then isn't that the fault of whoever's purchasing the products at the pharmacies? I can't imagine that any manufacturer that I've ever worked with has made any distributor I've ever worked with purchase more product than we could possibly sell to our customer base. Secondly, isn't there already a federal law in effect about record keeping? I mean, record keeping is one of the biggest facets of any regulatory organization like the federal government. If they don't know, if these opioid manufacturers, drug companies, don't know who they're selling product to, I'm certain that they are already in litigation. We've known for years that these drugs are addictive. This is nothing new. I mean, for goodness sakes, we knew this long before Brett Favre had any issues with Vicodin way back when. Since we've known that for years, and we're trying to say now that these pharmaceutical companies are telling doctors that they weren't addictive, good luck proving that. I certainly would not support this, and just because 43 other counties have supported this certainly doesn't mean we need to.
Supervisor Furry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A short follow-up to the attorney's comments in regard to a television program he apparently watched. I did not. I will say this. Our drug manufacturers are regulated by the federal government, the Federal Drug Administration. If there was an allegation that a drug company did, as our attorney alludes to this body, that a 60-minute program suggested, then it's the federal government's responsibility to not only find but prosecute that drug company. It's certainly not Winnebago County's responsibility to start pursuing actions of that sort. Once again, I urge you not to support this. This is just bad business for this county.
Supervisor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for John Bodner. Under the letter from Krieger Dickinson, first page, scope of services, council will work with the county in the collection of information necessary to form a good faith basis for filing a claim against the opiate manufacturers. Excuse me. Is there any issue as it relates to HIPAA, or what type of information are they looking for? Or does it go back to what Supervisor Haig said, where that information is readily available from another source?
Well, they're going to have to look at our records, but the identity of the people would have to be protected. Obviously, HIPAA is going to apply if we do this. I mean, if you came to the mental health clinic and you had a problem with opioids, we couldn't give our investigators your name. We'd have to hide that. We'd have to identify you by number or some type of code.
Do you know if that information is available from other sources? Is there a central database where this is being reported to?
I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Shorsey.
I did watch the 60 Minutes program, and it was excellent. A lot of what was discussed is at a much higher level with the distributors and crooked pharmacies. So it's basically criminal activity. And my question would be, has Winnebago County been identified as one of the areas that have been receiving unusually large amounts of opioids? And that, you know, we have an opioid problem, but in terms of this particular lawsuit, do we know? Yeah, and I would question that. So until we knew that information, it would be one thing if we were like rural West Virginia and, you know, we're getting, I can't remember the numbers, but they're huge. And obviously something illegal was going on there.
Supervisor Wingren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would respectfully suggest that my friend, Mr. Smith, has a conflict of interest and a long-standing history of denigrating lawyers of all kinds. And for him to suggest that they're in it only for the fee, what a horrible attack on the free enterprise system. Are you suggesting that people work for nothing, Mr. Smith? I'm just shocked. And then another person says, don't worry, because if there really is a problem, the federal government will sue the drug companies. Heck, the Congress is bought and paid for by the drug companies. Gee.
Supervisor Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I saw this come up, and actually this came up at the Board of Health as well, I'll admit I had conflicting thoughts in regards to, but that's simply because of my vocation. Because obviously I've been impacted or involved in this situation for many years. But over the years, as we talked more and more about opioids, I kept coming back to one experience that I had. That when I relate it, I learned that others had that experience. And what I'm referring to is when I was back in medical training. And I remember it so well because I paused when I heard this or when I was taught this, frankly. But when I was in medical training, we were taught, without a doubt, that opioids, if used for legitimate pain, an individual could not get addicted to it. Now, I'll tell you, it didn't make sense to me. I remember very well when I was being taught that it did not make sense to me. What I can clearly tell you is that is what I was taught in my medical training. And I can clearly tell you, when I've relayed that story to other folks, that they said the same thing. Now, I can't speak for every person in medical training. I can simply say for myself and other folks who I've talked to who went through medical training around the same time I did, that they also had similar experiences. So getting back to this resolution, the way I look at it is this. If it is the case that there are companies out there that did purport that information, that indeed it was the case, or that they were purporting that for legitimate pain you could not get addicted. And as a result of that, that's how, through my medical training, I was taught and others were taught. Then I would like to see them held accountable for that potentially, if it's the case. And so if this lawsuit does ultimately result in determining that some of these companies indeed were involved with purporting that sort of information, then I do feel they should be held accountable. There are multiple folks and people and groups, you could argue, who share some blame, frankly, in the opioid epidemic. There's no question about that. And I've been involved in that system and certainly felt I did the best I could, but wasn't perfect along the way. But nonetheless, with this resolution, I go back to that training. If indeed with these companies, that information in terms of our education was a result of those companies purporting that you could not get addicted for legitimate pain, then I do think they should be held accountable. And I do think our citizens should be compensated for that. So I'd urge you to support this.
Thank you.
Supervisor Powers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I looked behind me and I realized that Dr. Topol is here, and I was wondering if it might be appropriate to ask him about how Human Services Department has been impacted by the opioid epidemic.
Yes, I see I'm on the hot seat. Thank you for that. First of all, I want to say my position on this from the start was neutral, not meaning that I want to avoid the question. I just think that there are points on both sides, and I think you've all made those points really well. I think what I want you to be aware of is that my department spends a lot of taxpayer dollars when Medicaid and other areas don't cover. And the opioid crisis has affected Winnebago County, as many of you know, and you've heard stories about that. If Mr. Busby were here as a coroner, he'd be telling you the same. The sheriff and I have talked. He's no longer here, but the sheriff and I also have talked about how Winnebago County has had to spend a lot of taxpayer dollars to deal with this epidemic. And what I was under the impression that this particular lawsuit originated by counties just like ours, who have had very serious cuts in their programs because they've had to divert money from what they were doing to support families who have been affected by this. And my understanding about the lawsuit would be that while we would have to gather information for the lawsuit, that if successful, the money, some of the money that we've expended and other counties have expended for this would be hopefully reimbursed. No guarantees, absolutely no guarantees. It's a gamble, but the point of it is really that this is a county effort, not a state effort, which is different than the smoking situation where the states originated that. The states kept the money and didn't distribute that money back to counties where the real costs of that were. In this case, counties wanted to take an opportunity to do this rather than have the states lead. So if you support this tonight, I certainly will do everything I can to provide any and all information to the attorneys that they need to develop costs and in terms of our costs related to serving those folks. And if you choose not to, we will continue to serve folks who have been in this crisis. And so that's why I say I'm neutral, because obviously there are costs related to going forward. There are also costs to not getting involved. So I'm sorry I can't be more persuasive one way or the other, but I just wanted to provide that additional information to you.
I also, I think that the part that's really missing in the debate is the people that it helps for pain, that takes it legitimately through the doctor's prescription and is allowed so many pills. Supervisor Eisen.
I'd like to call for recorded vote, please, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Thompson.
Just one point that was already been made, and I think it needs to be emphasized. Should this suit go on, and should the people bringing it be successful against the drug companies, the result will be an increase in the price of drugs for everyone.
Okay, we'll vote by our little iPads. That is passed. Resolution 231-12-2017, authorize the appropriate funds for the purchase of property owned by Carol Merriweed and Carol Merriweed Trust. Supervisor Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of resolution number 231-12-2017.
Been moved and seconded. Okay, well, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Unanimous. Supervisor Robel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that we will adjourn until January 9th at 6 p.m. for a special order of business meeting.
Thank you. We are adjourned.